Hello there, Mr. K here, the mediocre painter, and I've been painting miniatures for some 32 odd years, and I'm doing videos to try and help you get into the wargaming hobby, because I've made the mistakes, so you don't have to. So, today I'm going to go through my painting guide for Garrek's Reavers from the Shadespire game, or Nightvault, whatever it is now called. And if you have the original Nightvault game, then basically these guys would have come with it. It wouldn't be sold as an expansion, it would be part of it. So let's talk about the assembly of these guys. So these models are actually pretty sturdy, so that's the good news about it. They're not like Sepulchre Guard, which are a little bit delicate, or the Thorns of the Briar Queen, which are really, really delicate. So that's the good news. They actually push fit together okay, but you are going to need to use a little bit of green stuff on a couple of them. I think I had to use some green stuff on Blooded Saek, because there's a dirty great big join line between the two pieces that you put together. But not bad. Certainly not the worst in the Shadespire series, but by no means the best. I'd probably say I'd give it a 3 out of 5 from an assembly perspective. And if you want some tips on how you assemble push fit miniatures, I did a video about that. It's up here, so you can have a good look at that. So my intention here is this with this guide is that this is nothing that's not beyond a beginner's ability to do. I haven't used any advanced techniques with this particular warband at all, and it's simply a case of base coating, washing, highlighting. It's not rocket science as far as miniature painting goes. As long as you thin your paints, as long as you've got reasonable brush accuracy, you'll be able to produce results that are pretty good, if not better than what I'm doing. After all, I am the mediocre painter. So let's start by looking at Arnulf, for example. So one of the things about the Reavers that might intimidate a lot of people is the fact that there's an awful lot of flesh on display. And flesh is a tricky thing to do well, because us being humans, we are very critical of anything that's flesh tones and such, because we know exactly what it's supposed to look like. The thing is about these guys, I wanted them to not quite look too human. I wanted them to sort of look a little bit off. You know, as though they were kind of dying inside. So I did a flesh wash on these guys, followed by a reclaimed fresh flesh shade. And because they're really nicely sculpted, I then actually used a thinned down brown paint to sort of pick out the real nice crevices in the muscles and such, to get a real contrast between the main body of flesh and the recesses. I then did a highlighting back up again. I didn't use a dry brush, I actually highlighted and painted on with the same flesh colour that I used. Where we have sort of the mark of corn on this guy, as well as some, I don't know whether you would call it a scar or whether actually something is bursting out of them, but I kind of like, oh well, okay, it looks to me like something's trying to get out of him, so I was like, oh, maybe I should make that a red. And so I used a red, and then I highlighted in a little white to make it really, really stand out. In terms of his helmet, I used like a dwarven bronze with a brown wash on it to try and give it like a copper look, and it actually turned out quite well. I was quite pleased with the way that turned out. If I move on to the back of him, you can see he's got like spikes coming out of him, so I kind of thought of that as being kind of a bone, so I just used a basic white there, and I used a flesh shade on reclaimed flesh shade again to basically wash it, and then just highlight it back up with a white. So if we have a look at his gauntlets, I suppose you would call them. I basically decided that the back of the gauntlets would be a silver and the forefront would be a gold. I then used a sepia wash actually on it in order to be able to get that wash, and I used an agrax on the silver to do the wash, and I don't think I did anything in the way of highlighting there actually. I think I left it as it is. In terms of the skull that's on his axe, I did that with a flesh and then a flesh shade again, and then I highlighted the front of it up, so I got the nose and around the tops of the eyes with a white, and just to make it pop out a little bit. So in terms of the actual axe itself, I used just a simple brown to basically for his grip with a dark brown wash, and then used silver on the actual axe itself with the trim being a gold, and then used an agrax to basically shade it. In terms of I decided, you know, these being all worshippers of a corn, that really the sword should be kind of, you know, sullied with blood for the blood god. And so I used a thin down red ink just on the edges, and then just brushed it a little bit with my fingers to kind of make it look a bit more realistic. And I did that on both his gladius and on his axe. So in terms of the stanchion that he's got, well, stanchion, I don't know what you call it, bracelet on his other arm, I basically just used a gold and an agrax on that. Now we come on to like the legs. So I decided like his pants were going to be a grey with a black wash, and then I highlighted back up with a grey. I kind of like doing that, it kind of seems to work. In terms of the fur around his boots, as it were, decided just to do a brown there, and I did like a little dry brush over the top of it with a little flesh, and then used an agrax wash. Decided to use a red for the backs of his shoes, again with an agrax wash, with a brown sort of grip, as it were, for the belt for the back of the front of his shin braces. So on his shin braces, I did a dwarven bronze on the main part of it with like a gold trim, and then I did an agrax wash and a little highlighting around the edges of the actual gold. In terms of his chains around his waist, I just used a gold with an agrax wash, and then I did the skulls in a flesh with a flesh wash, and then highlighted up with a white dry brush. So I kept it quite simple, and I followed that principle. He was kind of like my test model, and then I followed that principle across them all to basically try and keep them consistent and in tone. One of the things I liked about what I did here with these guys actually in general was the base. So on the base I basically did like a light grey with a black wash followed by a sepia wash. And then on the actual skulls themselves, I decided on the skulls to do a flesh tone first, and then I used a brown wash, like a mid-brown wash, because I wanted it to kind of look a little bit more red, you know, because of corn and all that. And then I highlighted back up with a flesh and then a white, and it actually came out quite well. I'm really pleased with the way that kind of worked, and it worked really well across them all really. So I'm really pleased with that because it was a bit of a gamble. So if I move on across the range, let's have a look at somebody else, and we'll have a look at Karsus the Chained. Is there anything particular on this guy that you need to pay a bit more attention to? Yeah, so here he's basically got quite a significant mark going on across his chest. I decided that I would do that in red, and then I just basically gently used a thin down black ink to go around it to try and basically give it a bit more definition. Other than that, I followed the same kind of principles that I'd followed on the prior model, so same thing going on here as before. So, you know, the pants, I've basically used a grey with a black wash followed by a highlight in a grey, and you know, everything else is basically the way I did Arnulf. So let's move on to the bloody Saek. Now this guy, I did actually need to use a little bit of green stuff in order to be able to do him properly, because it didn't quite work out right where his arm is. I did decide to do this guy a little differently, so basically I painted his shin pads differently. I used a red with a gold, and I used a red as well for the loincloth that he has sort of flowing in the wind, and I used an Agrax shade there to highlight it. One of the interesting things here is he's got a really nice belt buckle, and I decided to do that in like a white and then an Agrax, and then highlight back up in a white, try and make it look like some sort of creature skull rather than like a human skull. I'm quite pleased with the way that turned out. That looks pretty good. But again, everything else I followed the same kind of rules and principles that I'd followed on the previous model. Nothing too exciting going on. And now we got Targor. So Targor and Saek I did kind of in a similar way. I probably spent more time on Targor, I think, than I did on any of the other models, because I just had a real trouble getting him right. And I don't know why. Maybe it's because he's staring me in the face and shouting at me. So I guess one of pick out the interesting things on this model that's a little bit different to the others. He's got this big belt buckle again, and I decided that that wasn't metal, the actual thing was a skull, so I painted it as though it were a skull. He's actually got a skull on his belt buckle, and I used the same technique I use to paint the skulls actually underneath him on the actual base, which is basically, you know, a brown wash followed by a lighter highlight. What I found, what did I do differently on this guy other than that? So the other, I guess I did do the braces slightly differently, so I decided that I'd do the braces in basically I did it in a snake skin with an Agrax and with silver coming out as the spikes. And the other thing here that I did that was different was his hair I did yellow with a red wash, and then I highlighted in white, and then I painted the white yellow so that it stood out a bit more. The mark of corn that's across his chest I decided to do in a red, and I decided to pick out the one that was on his forehead in a red as well. So finally we talk about the top boy, which is Garrek Gorebeard. Again, very similar principles as I've followed previously, though I think what I really like about what I did on this guy is the actual head that he's holding. So on the head that he's holding, I painted it a flesh shade originally, and then I highlighted it with a white dry brush, and then I used a very thin green wash to basically make it look like it was, you know, somewhat old. And that's basically what I decided, and I really like the way that turned out, because it looks like a human sort of head, but there's that nice little green tinge to it because of that green wash, and I'm really pleased with the way that turned out. Unlike a lot of the other models in the series, this guy, to me, they don't seem to have gone too much to town on this guy, even though he's the leader compared to the others. So I followed pretty much the same kinds of principles as I did on all the other models. I spent a bit more time on his beard and his hair. So on his beard and his hair, I did a grey first, and then a black wash, and then I highlighted in a grey, and then I dry brushed with a white, and then toned it back again because the white was too much, with a thinned down blacker wash. And that's basically how I did it. So as per usual with these guys, you know, the trick is, you know, doing the eyes and the teeth right. So basically in terms of the teeth, I just basically used a brush and got some white paint a little tacky on it, not quite dry, and then just brushed it across the teeth to try and pick them out. So I don't think I actually picked out all the teeth because I did that, but it looks pretty good. The eyes are always tricky on these kinds of models, especially when they're human looking. They're always tricky, and really the only way to get good at eyes is practice makes perfect. So what I usually do with eyes, I usually like a Mournival brown to actually paint the entire eye as an oval, let that dry, and then do a white to leave a brown edge around it, and then basically just get a many zero, like a 10 or a 20 zero with a little bit of black on, and then just go in there and pop the pupil, and that's it. Try not to overthink it with eyes. If you do that, then usually you will get through it. And also, I always find it best with eyes is to do both and not worry about it. So do both and then go, oh, actually, they ain't any good, I'm going to have to start over. And if that's the case, then basically let it dry, go over it with white again, and then try again. But don't like focus on doing one eye and go, oh, that's no good, and then blat it out and move on. You need to move on to that next eye, because you will find that the more you practice, the better you get, and you'll probably find you'll do 50% of the eyes right first time. But if you try and do the same thing over and over again, you'll probably find you'll just keep on screwing it up. And on this guy, you know, you've actually got 4 eyes to paint if you bother to paint the eyes on both eyes on the actual head that he's carrying. But I decided that I didn't want that kind of hassle, so I basically painted in some red from the other guy's eye as though it was coming out as though his eye was actually missing. Of course, you could do that with both eyes as well, to save yourself from having to paint the eyes. So there you go, that's the Garrek's Reavers, and hopefully you found that interesting, and hopefully you can use those kinds of methods and paints and such to paint your own. You don't have to use the same colours I did or anything. That's why I try not to point out what the colours actually are, just to give you an idea of the effects that you can get simply matching colours with washes. Again, as a beginner, you can produce these kinds of results probably better than I can. If you like this, then please like, then please subscribe. I will be doing more. Thanks for your time. Bye.